Chapter 86. Karen sprained her ankle and couldn't move much. She couldn't cook, but she didn't eat much that night. Kevin offered to cook. Karen sat on the sofa in the living room while she was spying on him occasionally. He was in his home clothes, then he put on a loose outer, paired with Karen's cartoon-printed apron. Because he was very tall, her apron was especially small on his body, which looked a little funny. This was the first time that Kevin had cooked on his own since they got married. It could be seen from his look that he had never done these things before. Seeing that he had been busy for a long time and had not made any progress, Karen was a little anxious. She moved towards the kitchen limpingly and said, "Kevin, why don't I do it?" Kevin looked back at her and frowned. "Go back and sit down." Karen stood still, touched her belly, and looked at him eagerly. "I'm so hungry." Kevin put down the kitchen knife in his hand and walked over. With a sullen face, he picked her up and said, "Hey, you should take a rest." Karen took the opportunity to kiss him on the corner of his mouth. Then she looked at him with a smile and said, "Why don't you bring a stool over here, and I'll command." Karen's kiss came abruptly. Kevin froze for a moment and did not speak. However, he did move a chair for her at the door of the kitchen and asked her to sit down. Karen said, "First, wash the rice in the pot, and then wash the vegetables and cut the vegetables. Then, after you stir-fried the vegetables, the rice will be ready." Kevin did not speak, but he did as Karen said. Looking at Kevin's appearance, she simply felt that the God was extremely unfair. How could God give a man such an excellent appearance and smart brain? This man cooked for the first time, but his movements seemed to be very skilled. He didn't seem inexperienced at all. Such a person was often called a genius. No matter what he learned, he could learn it quickly. As he was chopping the vegetables, he was still very attractive. Karen sighed again. She was lucky enough to meet such a good man on a blind date. "Kevin, I have something to tell you." Anyway, now that she had time, Karen could take this time to talk to Kevin about the past. The things that had happened in the past had been revealed in front of so many people today. Kevin should have seen and heard something. If she pretended that nothing had happened and did not tell him anything, it would be unfair for him. Besides, she had already made up her mind to live a good life with him. So making things clear about the past was the best way to be completely open to him. Kevin turned and looked at Karen. Seeing her serious expression, he had already guessed what she wanted to tell him. Before marrying her, he had sent people to investigate everything about her, including her early life. He wanted to pretend that he didn't know anything, but he didn't want to lie to her. So he said, "Karen, I've known everything about your past." You know everything?" Karen was surprised. As she thought about everything that had happened in the past, her own family, and all of that information being known by this man, her heart suddenly felt uncomfortable. When she was a little sad, she heard him say softly, "It's all in the past. No matter how others frame you, you are still the best." His tone was serious and firm, and you could sense that he felt sorry for her. 3 years ago, she was framed by Christine and was forced to leave her hometown. Except for Faye, everyone thought that she seduced her brother-in-law, and that she was a woman who lived a messy life. Now 3 years had passed. Finally, there was someone who told her with certainty that she was still the best, even after knowing the past. And this man was her husband, the man who always said that he would spend the rest of his life with her. After listening to Kevin's words, Karen smiled happily again and suddenly opened her arms. "Then are you willing to hug the best, Karen?" Kevin wanted to hug her, but he had just cut the meat in his hand. It was full of oil. Just as he was hesitating, Karen stood up and limped behind him, and she embraced his waist with her arms. She pressed her head against his back and playfully touched him. "Then, Mr. Kyle, please promise me that you can only be nice to the best Karen in the future. You are not allowed to be nice to other women." "Be careful of the injury on your foot," Kevin warned. "Cut your food. Don't worry about me," Karen said willfully. The problem was that her whole body was pressed onto him. He could feel her breasts being pressed on his back too. How could he cut the vegetables well? No matter how composed Kevin was, he wanted to make a move on her after being teased by this little woman. He took her hand away, turned around, and looked at her seriously. "Do you still want to eat?" Karen nodded with a smile. Kevin said seriously, "Sit down if you want to. Don't disturb me anymore." "Yes, Mr. President." Karen bowed to Kevin with a smile and then limped back to sit. Judging from her excited look, he knew that what happened in the afternoon did not affect her at all, because she was no longer afraid, because Kevin was by her side. Not long after, the food that Kevin personally cooked was served on the plate. It looked pretty good, so Karen quickly picked up the chopsticks and took a bite. It did not just look good, but also had a good taste. She was skeptical. "Director Kyle, is this really your first time cooking?" "Yes." Kevin snorted softly. "So cold," Karen suddenly said. Kevin hurriedly got up and went back to his room to take a cardigan for her to put on. "You should have dressed warmly." "Stupid man." She said she felt so cold. Did he not understand what she meant? Kevin's face changed. He picked up the food and placed them in her bowl. "Have a good meal." It was almost 10 o'clock in the evening, and Karen was hungry. She picked up the chopsticks and started to eat. When she was eating, she looked up at Kevin occasionally. At the dining table, Kevin would never say much. He would only eat in silence. Karen wanted to talk to him several times but finally gave up. When she finally put down her chopsticks, she said, "Mr. Kyle, the food you cooked was good. Please work harder in the future. I'm glad you like it." He began to clean up after eating. It was hard to imagine that a young master who used to be served by others would be willing to wash dishes for a little woman. If his two best friends saw it, they would laugh their heads off. Chapter 87. At night, it began to rain. Chatterton Town was located in the south. The temperature suddenly dropped several degrees due to the cold wind in the north. Karen was watching an entertainment show on the sofa with Momo. She was excited to watch the two parties having debates. Back then, Karen was still the leader of the school campus debates team. As long as she played, she would not lose the debate game. Kevin was busy working in the study room, so there was only Momo accompanying Karen. Karen could only talk to Momo, who did not understand her. She held Momo in her arms and said proudly, "Momo, let me tell you something. When I was in school participating in a debate, I was much stronger than them." Woof, woof, woof. Although Momo did not understand, she still gave Karen some acknowledgement. Karen continued. When those members of the debating team heard that the main debater was Karen, they were so scared that they wet their pants. "Woo," Momo wailed. It was so late and Momo wanted to sleep, so she didn't want to hear her mother nagging here. Why didn't her mother speak with Uncle Kyle? Why did she have to pester her? She was just a little pet and couldn't understand human language at all, okay? "Mother, I beg for mercy. Kid, are you so unwilling to chat with me for a while?" Karen rubbed Momo's messy head hard. "Well, I won't make things difficult for you. Go to sleep." Momo rubbed against Karen's arms and then ran to her little room to sleep. Momo went to bed, and Karen watched TV for a while alone. Although she was watching TV, she was always paying attention to the movements in the study room and anticipating when would Kevin came out, just in case she missed him. She waited for a long time, but there was still no movement in the study. She didn't want to wait, so she decided to take the initiative. Karen thought for a moment, went to the kitchen to warm up a cup of milk, and knocked on the door of the study room with the milk. Before she heard the word "please come in," she pushed the door open and went in. "Mr. Kyle, you must be tired." Karen held the hot milk and said, "I specially heated it for you. You can have a drink." "Why don't you go to bed?" Kevin asked without looking up. "Because it's cold. I can't fall asleep." She was really afraid of the cold, but it must mean something else at this time. Kevin looked up and found that she was wearing a pink cartoon-printed pajamas, which made her fair skin look more attractive. Kevin turned his eyes to the computer screen and did not intend to pay attention to her. Karen limped behind him and massaged his back. "Mr. Kyle, I've learned massage before. Would you like to try it?" "Karen, stop it." Kevin called her name again, but his tone was more serious than before, as if he was a little angry. To be honest, they had been together for so long, but Karen had never seen him like this. She suddenly felt that he was very cute. Yes, it was very cute. Karen suddenly rushed over and kissed him lightly. Then she licked her pink and tender lips. "I just want to kiss you." "What do you want to do with me?" Kevin was being patient. After being teased by Karen several times as a man, he couldn't resist it anymore. Just as Karen was proud of herself, Kevin stretched out his long arms and pulled her into his arms and ruthlessly kissed her. The tip of his tongue pried open her white teeth, kissed her intensely. When Kevin became fierce, Karen had no strength at all. After all, she had no experience in kissing. Kevin also had no experience, but he was a man. It seemed that men were born to know more about relationships. His kiss was fierce from the beginning that she wanted to escape. However, as soon as she had this idea, Karen immediately drove it away because she wanted to have intimacy with him. Her hands first grabbed his clothes helplessly, and then slowly became braved, stretching out to stroke his chest. She was dissatisfied with the current situation. She clumsily touched the lower hem of his clothes, then went under the clothes and stroked his strong body directly. Because of her actions, Kevin kissed more fiercely, as if he wanted to swallow Karen whole. Karen accepted this and played along with it, and his hot palm also slipped under her clothes, taking in the sensation of her touch. After all, Karen had no experience in this, and she heard from Faye that it would hurt for the first time. As she thought more, she panicked a little and struggled a little. "Karen?" Kevin suddenly let go of her, held her restless little hand, and said in a rough voice, "I still have some work to do." She clearly felt that he also wanted her, but why did he stop? Karen was thick-skinned, but she couldn't tell him directly that, "Kevin, I want to do that with you." "I will drink milk. You go to sleep first? I'll come later," he said. His voice was deep, and his face was still red. "Oh, then I'll go to sleep." The first attempt failed, which made Karen very depressed but also felt very shameful. She had already made it to this point. This man had not made any move yet. Was he still going to play hard to get? She lowered her head and scolded him in her heart while walking. Stupid man. What a stupid man. She had already taken the initiative to come to him, and he still did not make any move. If he wanted to have it next time, she would torture him severely. After Karen left, Kevin had no mood to work. The hormones in his body were raging. How could a smart person like Kevin not know what Karen wanted to do? But he didn't want Karen at this time. Today, Karen had once again experienced the incident of being framed 3 years ago. She must be helpless and afraid. When she needed a person most, he stood beside her, gave her support, pulled her out of the mud, and let her live under the bright sunshine again. At this time, Karen was more grateful to him, so she wanted to give herself to him. He guessed that she did not really want to commit to physical intimacy wholeheartedly. If he chose to have her at this time, what was the difference between him and those beasts? Therefore, Mr. Kyle, who thought he knew Karen very well, suppressed his desire for Karen and went to the bathroom to take a cold shower. Chapter 88. Back in the room, Karen laid in bed and couldn't fall asleep. She was a little shy and embarrassed. Tonight she finally had the courage to go to the study room to find Kevin, but he rejected her. She didn't believe that Kevin didn't know what she wanted to do. He used so much strength when he kissed her, and she even felt him. Karen did not want to think about it anymore. If she continued to think about it, she would definitely lose sleep all night because of the embarrassment. While she was deep in her thoughts, Kevin pushed the door open and came in. She could hear that he was opening the door and was walking very lightly. He must be worried about waking her up. She couldn't fall asleep. How could he wake her up? I hate him so much. Kevin lay down on the bed, pulled the quilt to cover her, and then lay down next to her. She heard him sigh again. How could he sigh? Karen was annoyed and kicked him. She was very strong, so when she kicked on Kevin's thigh, she could feel that he was slightly stunned, and then she heard him say, "Don't." His tone was very helpless, like an elder who had no way to deal with naughty children. Karen retracted her foot and murmured with a red face, "I didn't fuss with you." "Karen," Kevin called her name out. After a pause, he said, "I don't want you to do anything against your will. Do you understand?" Karen didn't understand before, but after hearing his words, she understood. It turned out that he was worried that she wanted to get along with him only because of superficial reasons, not from the bottom of her heart. They had registered for marriage for 3 months. This man was willing to keep his original promise, wait for her, and wait for her to completely accept him. She turned over again, rolled to his side, and pulled his arm to rest under her head. "Well, I understand, but she was not doing things against her will. Did he understand?" "Then go to sleep." Kevin rubbed her head and said softly, "In the long night, how many men and women hugged each other and slept together? The two hearts beat faster because of each other, but they managed to keep themselves together." The next day, when Karen woke up, Kevin was sitting by the window and reading the newspaper. It was still raining today, and there was no sunshine coming in. He looked more depressed. "You're awake." As usual, he would look back and greet her softly when she woke up. Karen nodded. She suddenly remembered how she took the initiative to seduce him last night, and her delicate face blushed again. He got up and walked over and grabbed her feet. Karen was shocked and instinctively tried to dodge, but Kevin said, "Let me see how your feet are doing." "Oh," Karen whispered. It turned out that he wanted to check on her wound yesterday, and she was overthinking again. Kevin pinched her slightly. "Does it still hurt?" Karen shook her head. "I can't feel any pain at all. Thank you." Kevin let go of her and said, "Go wash up. I'll wait for your breakfast." He went out with Momo and waited for her for a long time. It was so ordinary and boring, but simple and satisfying. After so many years, she really found the feeling of home. Finally, there was a person who was willing to accompany her day and night and didn't ask her to give him anything, just to accompany her. Looking at his back, Karen's lips curled up slightly, and there was a sweet smile on her face. On the breakfast table, there were many different types of food, nutritious and delicious. She was in a good mood and ate more than usual. Kevin put down his chopsticks very early and looked at her silently, as if she had turned into the Karen from 3 years ago. The one who was ambitious, confident in her work, and carried a rush of strength. She was simple and fearless, even when the sky fell. Karen added more vitality and made people unable to resist her, but it still made people want to hold her in their hands and take good care of her. And he was willing to be the one who took care of her for the rest of his life. "I'm full." She looked up and smiled at him. The bright smile seemed to make the cold weather warmer. "Okay." He looked at her and could not look away. After a long while, he said, "I have to go on a business trip for a few days." He was going on a business trip again. Karen was a little disappointed, but she did not show it. She still smiled at him and said, "Go ahead. I have Momo to accompany at home." Their eyes turned to Momo. It was squatting on the chair and barked like it was responding that it would accompany their mother well. Karen took Momo over and touched her head. "Good girl. Next time, you have to call Daddy instead of Uncle Kyle." After that, Karen looked at Kevin, blinked, and asked, "Can Momo call you that?" "Of course." This was what Kevin said in his heart, but he did not say anything. He just gently nodded, and his face was calm, so no one could tell what he was thinking. Karen didn't want to let him go, so she asked, "Say something." This Karen was more energetic. Kevin couldn't do anything to her, so he had to say, "Okay." "Okay." Karen smiled with satisfaction. She let go of Momo and was ready to go to work. When she returned to the room, Kevin also came in with a tie in his hand. He was about to tie it for himself. Karen looked at him irresistibly. Kevin noticed her gaze and turned to look at her. "What's wrong?" Looking at Kevin's deep eyes, Karen unconsciously bit her delicate lips and wanted to say something but stopped. Her eyes flashed as if she wanted to say a lot of things, but she gritted her teeth and resisted saying anything. Kevin was stunned by her gaze. He thought that this woman was thinking about some random things and was looking for trouble. He sighed in a low voice, pulled off his unpolished tie, walked to Karen's side, and looked into her eyes firmly. He said softly, "Don't worry, I'll be back soon," he said very gently. Karen smiled when she heard that, knowing that Kevin was wrong. But she did not say it out loud, just nodded with a faint smile, then reached out to take the tie in Kevin's hand and gently tied it for him. "I just wanted to tie your tie once. In the future, let me tie your necktie for you." Karen lowered her head and said softly, "In ancient times, there were men who drew on eyebrows for their wives for the rest of their lives. Let me tie your necktie for the rest of your life." From last night, Karen seemed to have changed into another person. She stopped pestering the past grievances and finally was willing to face up to their relationship. Kevin was surprised by her change, but on the contrary, the endless joy in his heart was the most adamant. Chapter 89. He had never experienced such a feeling before. It was new, yet memorable. Karen was still tying the tie seriously, waiting for his response quietly. She had her head lowered, and Kevin could not see her face clearly. All he could see was a flash of her thick eyelashes moving, as if she was calling for his pity. Kevin could not help it. He suddenly raised her chin, leaned over, and kissed her. The kiss came so suddenly and violently that Karen stiffened. However, unlike what she did usually, she didn't hide or reject, but responded awkwardly. The kiss was long and sweet. They didn't let each other go until they stopped breathing. Kevin stroked Karen's tender face and smiled slightly next to her ear. He whispered, "Okay." His voice was hoarse and deep, like refined sand with a warm breath. Karen trembled. She quickly lowered her head to cover her blushing face and pretended to tie his necktie. However, her hands were a little bit of shaking. She really missed the determination to seduce Kevin last night. After a long time, Karen finished tying his tie. She let out a long sigh of relief, raised her head, and winked at Kevin. Kevin was amused by her look and shook his head dotingly. Then, he quickly kissed her blushing cheek. "Thank you, Mrs. Kyle," he said. A satisfied smile appeared on her face. She suddenly thought of a poem when she saw the knot in the middle of the tie. "A gold thread ties two hearts together. I'm willing to be with you for the rest of my life." "You're welcome, Mr. Kyle," she answered with a smile. When Karen went to work today, the atmosphere in the office was completely different. She learned that Sunny, the manager of the business department, had been fired by the company. Now the position for the manager of the business department was left empty. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Karen. Some were envious, and some were jealous. But they still came to talk to her. They called her Mrs. Kyle in a very uncomfortable way. She was Mrs. Kyle, but in the company, she was just Karen and did not want to be called Mrs. Kyle. People called her Mrs. Kyle would mean that they dismissed her working competency. She didn't want to publicize her relationship with Kevin because she was worried about this. Now it really happened just like what she was worried about. Alice Cole said excitedly, "Karen, Manager Olson has been fired. You will soon be the manager of our business department. You are the most promising one." To be honest, if it was based on merits, Karen was confident that she had the ability to be the manager of the business department among the crowd. But now, in people's eyes, if she could become the manager of the business department, it was not because of her strength, but her relationship with Kevin. For the whole day, Karen didn't do much work. She spent a great deal of time talking to those who suddenly approached her, perhaps to make amends with her and get on her good books. If it went on like this, could she still work? After getting off work, Karen did not go home but went to the studio to complain to Faye. Faye was all happy to see Karen. She took her to the office to show Karen around. "Karen, the studio's profit this year has doubled. If we continue to make profits like this, we will soon be able to buy a house and a car in this town." Hearing such good news, Karen was also very excited. It was all Miss Reed's effort. "Look at you flattering." Faye rolled her eyes at Karen and said, "Karen, why don't we do it together? With my management method and your talent, we can work together to build the most famous wedding design studio in Chatterton Town." Today her colleagues were surrounding her, calling her Mrs. Kyle. In addition, Karen was thinking about her future. She had thought about giving up the current job and returning to the studio with Faye. It was her dream to design the most beautiful wedding dress in the world. During countless dreams, she even dreamed of standing on the world's highest podium and getting the best designer's trophy. She really wanted to pick up her passion and design a wedding dress for herself and Kevin. Before Karen answered, Faye added, "Karen, do you still remember your former idol, Ivan?" "Of course I remember. I've regarded him as my idol since I was 17 years old." When it came to the name Ivan, Karen's face was also full of excitement. "I saw him a few days ago." "What? You've seen him?" Faye was surprised. After thinking for a while, she said, "It's impossible. I left my contact number when I helped you submit your work. How could he find you?" "What submission?" Karen was confused. Faye took out a piece of document and placed it in front of Karen. It's said that he came to Chatterton Town and had hosted a small competition not long ago. What's that? Karen had paid a lot of attention to the design field, so how could she not hear about it? Faye added, because of the lack of media publicity, there are not many people who knew about it, but it was very well known in the circle. Many people, including me, passed on their own design draft to him, but he did not like any of them. Karen nodded. It's a pity. If you can study with Ivan, it would be a great experience. Faye said with a smile, he didn't like my design. I was reluctant, so I saw the design draft that you handed out 3 years ago. I didn't expect that person to like your design at first glance. With this, Faye showed a dissatisfied look. Your design is not much better than mine. Why did he choose yours instead of me? Which design draft? Karen was so surprised that she couldn't believe what she had heard was true. It's the wedding dress you designed for yourself 3 years ago. Faye paid attention to Karen's expression and continued. Karen, you are married now. Let the past go. Let's thrive for a new life together. If it was a few days ago, Karen might hesitate, but today she didn't want to hesitate anymore. She didn't want to miss the opportunity that she had missed a few years ago. However, she did not agree with Faye's proposal immediately. She had to discuss this with Kevin and listen to his opinion. While she was thinking about Kevin, he called her. Looking at the words Mr. Kyle on the screen, Karen smiled and answered, Hello, Mr. Kyle? As soon as she said that, the person on the other end of the phone was silent for a long time. Then she heard his serious voice. Hello, Mrs. Kyle. Anything? Karen really wanted to ask if he missed her, but she was still shy and did not want to be too straightforward. Chapter 90. There was another silence on the other end of the phone. The silence lasted longer than the previous one. It was so long that Karen finally said, Say something. Don't think too much about the company's affairs. I won't interfere with the business manager's position, nor will I let my subordinates interfere. Kevin said. Kevin's sexy and pleasant voice came from the other end. Every word seemed to beat Karen's heart rhythmically. Kevin knew that Karen cared about this, so he would never interfere and let her fight for that position with her own ability. Whether she could succeed or fail was her own choice. He would never interfere. Karen nodded. Okay, I believe you. Kevin added, It's cold outside. Go home early if you have nothing to do. Karen smiled. All right, Mr. Kyle. Seeing Karen on the phone, calling him Mr. Kyle and smiling shyly, Faye got goosebumps all over her body. Mrs. Kyle, you know that I haven't had a man's nourishment for a long time. Are you showing off in front of me? Faye, let me ask you something. Karen looked around and checked if there was anyone else around her. She lowered her voice and said, Does Sebastian control his lust when he is with you? My lust is stronger than his. Faye simply and rudely said such a sentence. Suddenly, she realized what Karen meant and asked, Do you mean that your man is not willing to touch you? Don't say it so loudly. Karen quickly covered Faye's mouth. Although everyone was off work now, if a customer walked in at this time, it would be awkward. Karen was a little embarrassed and said hesitantly, In fact, we haven't done that. Faye roared again. Karen, are you sure there's nothing wrong with your man? He surely has no problem. Karen was sure. Having slept in the same bed with Kevin for such a long time, she could still feel something. All right, he has no problem, but he's sleeping next to you and he didn't touch you. What that means is, you are not hot enough. Men are not interested in you, Faye said mercilessly. Faye, do you think we can still be friends? Karen slightly slapped Faye on the back. Just pretend that I didn't tell you. Karen, so you're waiting for me? An extremely arrogant voice came from somewhere. Faye and Karen looked behind at the same time and saw Charlie coming in from the door of the office with an arrogant look. Seeing Charlie, Faye's reaction was more intense than Karen's. She instinctively jumped in front of Karen and shouted, Scumbag, what are you doing here? Be careful. I'll knock you to death with a stick. Faye, we haven't seen each other for such a long time. Is this how you feel when you see your old friend? Charlie said with a cheeky smile. He didn't take Faye's anger seriously at all. Get out. Faye pointed at the door. You are not welcomed here. I'm not here to see you. Charlie cast his eyes on Karen. Karen, I haven't seen you for a few days. I miss you so much. Thinking of the brief conversation between Karen and Faye, his eyes lit up. It seemed that Karen and Kyle Guy had been married for a long time, but they didn't even have sex. If it weren't because Karen was waiting for him, he didn't know what other possible explanation there was to explain her abstinence. Charlie, I don't want to see you, and I don't want you to come to our office. Karen also pointed to the door. You better leave immediately, or we'll call the police. Karen, why are you so ruthless? Charlie shook his head in disappointment and said, Don't think that just because innovative tech was acquired by Rovio Corporation Inc., and that Kyle Guy has the support of Rovio Corporation Inc., that I can't do anything to him. Scumbag, Faye almost jumped up. Karen grabbed her and comforted her. Faye, don't worry. It's not worth hurting yourself for this kind of person. Karen. Faye gritted her teeth. In the past, she had seen what kind of things Karen had experienced and how hard Karen had tried to forget them for the past 3 years. She didn't want anyone to destroy Karen's happiness. Karen looked at Charlie calmly, who still had a faint smile on his lips. Charlie, you've threatened me many times. Are you still a man? Ha, Charlie sneered. Didn't Kevin go on a business trip? Do you want to see him leaving the house alive, but coming back as a dead man? Oh, really? Karen walked to Charlie with a smile. That's why, Karen, you have to listen to me. Before Charlie finished his words, he was slapped heavily on the face. Karen stood in front of him, looking at him coldly with a malicious look in her gentle eyes. Karen acted so quickly that not only Charlie was shocked, even Faye was taken aback. At this moment, Karen was like the Karen she was 3 years ago. Decisive and hot-tempered, she would never be threatened by anyone. Karen, Charlie touched the burning left cheek. Karen slapped on and smiled obscenely and wickedly. You hit me. How dare you hit me? I only hit shameless bastard like you. Karen's lips curled slightly and she said coldly, Charlie, mark my words. I'm telling you, if you dare to hurt a strand of Kevin's hair, even if I die, I will drag the whole Gook family with me to the grave. Karen's tone was very cruel and cold. It seemed that as long as Charlie dared to hurt Kevin, she would definitely drag him down. Charlie had never seen her like this. Even the hot-tempered Karen 3 years ago had never had such a side. For a moment, he really believed that Karen would have the ability to drag him to death. Soon, Charlie came back to his senses. No matter how hot-tempered Karen was, she was just a little girl. Even if Kevin had Rovio Corporation Inc.'s support, but surely Rovio Corporation Inc. would only back innovative tech up, not Kevin. These two people did not have the strength to fight with the Gook family. If the Gook family wanted to trample them to death, they wouldn't have room to resist. Faye was also shocked by Karen's words. When she thought it through, she was worried that Charlie would take his revenge, so she quickly picked up her mobile phone and called 911 to call the police. Charlie sneered and said, Well, let's wait and see. Charlie said those harsh words and turned to leave. Faye said with lingering fear, Karen, will that scumbag Charlie